My father died on a Thursday. By Saturday, my stepmother had already changed the locks on a building she had never owned. I found out when I drove up that weekend to get a photograph from his office, the small one above Unit A, with the metal desk and the window that faced the parking lot. My father kept a photo from a fishing trip we took in 2009 up there, the two of us, sunburned, squinting at the camera. I wanted it. I tried my key. Nothing. I tried it twice. When I called Valerie, she said she'd changed the locks to protect the estate. A contractor had already been through the units, she told me, just to assess the condition of things. She'd get me a copy of the key once everything had been inventoried. I told her I understood. I drove home. I sat down at my kitchen table and looked at the folder sitting there. It had been sitting there for 8 years. My father built things quietly. He didn't announce his plans and he didn't explain his decisions. He just worked and saved, and when I was 23, he bought a piece of land in a light industrial corridor on the east side of town and spent 2 years converting it into 4 commercial units. Tenants by the second year. Nothing glamorous, just a building that paid its way. When I was 30, he called me into that office and slid a folder across the desk. "I want you to have this," he said. "Not when I'm gone. Now." He'd already done the paperwork, filed it, recorded it. My name was on the deed. He told me not to mention it. He didn't give me a long explanation. He just said, "You'll understand eventually." I asked why he was doing it this way. He looked out the window for a moment. "Because I want it settled," he said, "while I can still settle it." I didn't touch the property. I didn't change anything about how it was managed. I deposited the income into a separate account and left it alone. My father was still alive. It felt wrong to think of it as mine yet. Then he met Valerie. She was efficient, decisive, and had built a solid life of her own before my father came along. I respected that. She moved in within a year, and they married by the second. I kept my distance, probably more than I should have, but my father seemed genuinely settled, and that was enough for me. Then came the diagnosis. A cardiac condition, slow and progressive. It took 3 years. During those 3 years, Valerie became the person who managed access to my father, appointments, medications, visitors. If you needed to know how he was doing, you called Valerie. If you wanted to come by, you went through Valerie. I understood some of it. She was there every single day. I was 4 hours north. The comments started about a year before he died. My uncle mentioned she'd brought up the Garfield's property at Thanksgiving dinner. My aunt said she'd told someone at a birthday gathering that the assets needed to stay in the family, meaning hers. In January, my cousin texted me. She's already telling people what she's going to do with the building. I noted all of it. I said nothing. My father was still alive. The gathering happened 4 days after the funeral. Valerie held it at the house. I was invited. I sat near the back of the room and watched her run it like a project meeting. She had printed pages, an outline of the estate, talking points about next steps. She walked her sister, her son Derek, and her daughter through what she called the situation, and she did not speak in maybes. She spoke in plans. Derek, she explained, had been looking for space to expand his HVAC business for 2 years. Unit A was the right size. The current tenant was month to month. She had already been in contact with a commercial real estate broker about transition timing. Derek nodded along, the way people do when they've already had the private version of this conversation, and the group presentation is a formality. Her daughter asked about income from the other 3 units while the transition happened. Valerie said that would be distributed to the family on a schedule she and the estate attorney would finalize together. She used the phrase rental income twice. She had numbers. Valerie's sister asked about the contractor report. Valerie said the units were in good shape, minor cosmetic work on Unit C. She was getting a second opinion on the HVAC in Unit B. She smiled a little when she said that. and Derek said he'd handle it himself once he was in. Relatives were bringing questions to her all week. What happens to the property taxes? Whether the tenants had been notified? Whether there was a current appraisal? Valerie answered all of it, confidently, completely. She had done her homework. She believed she was the person in charge of this situation, and everyone around her believed it too. My cousin pulled me outside after the gathering. We stood by the cars in the dark. She said, "Derek already told his business partner he's taking that unit. He's been telling people for weeks." I didn't say anything. "He put a deposit down on equipment," she said. "Commercial grade. He's counting on it." I looked at her. Then I said I needed to get on the road. That night I sat at my kitchen table and kept going back to things that meant something different now. My father calling me in 2019 out of nowhere, asking if I knew where the management company kept their records. I thought he was just being organized. Now I understood. He was making sure I could find everything on my own, without anyone's help. A conversation at Christmas 3 years before his diagnosis, the last easy Christmas, where he asked me out of nowhere whether I'd ever thought about holding income property long-term. I said yes. He said, "Good. I think you understand it." The photograph he'd placed in that specific office, on that specific desk, above Unit A. He knew I'd want it. He knew exactly which door I'd try to open. Valerie had a broker. She had a contractor report. She had rental income projections. Derek had equipment on order and a business partner who already knew the plan. She had built an entire future on something she had never owned a single day of. I stopped trying to make sense of what she thought was happening. I pulled out the management statements, the tax records, the transfer filing at the county recorder's office, time-stamped and clean. I made copies of everything. I put one set in my car. The will reading was on a Tuesday morning. Valerie arrived first. She'd brought a notepad. She sat at the center of the table, and her posture said she had already done the work, already organized the information, already mapped the outcome. Derek sat to her right, her daughter to her left. My uncle came, 2 cousins. Stephen, the estate attorney who had worked with my father for 15 years, sat at the head of the table with a slim file in front of him. The room smelled like old paper and coffee that had been sitting on the burner too long. Someone had brought flowers the day before. They were already starting to turn at the edges. On the drive over, I had thought about how certain she was, how the broker conversations had happened, how Derek's equipment was sitting in a warehouse somewhere, how her daughter had already done math on income distributions, how her sister had been told, how relatives had spent a week bringing questions to Valerie, and Valerie had answered every one of them. She walked into that room believing she understood everything. Stephen read methodically. The house went to Valerie, with the mortgage. The liquid accounts, smaller than most people expected, because my father had paid for his own care for 3 years, were distributed. A vehicle, personal items. Each line read clearly. No one interrupted. The room was very quiet. When Stephen finished, Derek looked up. What about the Garfield property? Stephen looked down at his notes for a moment. Then he looked across the table, past Valerie, past Derek, past her daughter, and said my name. Not a question, a statement. He explained that the Garfield property had been transferred by recorded deed 8 years prior. It was not part of the estate. It had never been part of the estate. He asked if anyone had questions about the transaction. Derek said he didn't understand. Valerie said nothing. She was looking at me. Her daughter asked when exactly the transfer had been executed. Stephen told her the year. She did what I knew someone would eventually do. She counted backward to when her mother had met my father. The building had been in my name for 3 years before their first date. Derek asked about contesting. Stephen explained carefully what a recorded deed transfer meant, And what it didn't leave room for. There was nothing to contest. There had never been anything to contest. The broker conversations, the contractor report, the rental income projections Valerie had presented to her family as settled, the equipment Derek had ordered, the business partner who already knew the plan, every bit of it built on a property that had belonged to someone else the entire time. Nobody in that room said anything. I thanked Stephen. I picked up my folder. I put on my coat. Valerie found her voice when I was almost to the door. She said my name like a question. I turned around. She looked smaller than she had when she'd walked in with her notepad and her certainty. "I didn't know," she said. "I know," I told her. That was the point. The management company sent the quarterly report 2 weeks later. All 4 units current. Unit A had just renewed its lease. I drove up one afternoon the following month and let myself into the office with the key I'd picked up from the management company the morning after the will reading. The photograph was still on the desk. My father and me, 2009, squinting into the sun. I thought about how he had done all of it without a single announcement. No confrontation, no dramatic conversation, just paperwork recorded quietly at the county office, 8 years of income sitting in an account, and 1 folder on a metal desk above Unit A. Valerie had spent the last year building a plan. She'd talked to a broker. She'd walked a contractor through the units. She'd presented projections to her family like a woman who had already won. And she never once checked the county recorder's website. The flowers on that conference table were already turning when I walked out. He knew exactly what he was doing.